Welcome everyone to the AIHS Career Webinar Series. So today we have Rachel and Helen from HOK Talent Solutions. Today their webinar will be Cracking the Job Interview Code, 6 Success Strategies. So without further ado, Rachel and Helen, off you go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Phoebe, for introducing us. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you also to the Australian Institute of Health and Safety for enabling us to put on this webinar for you. A bit of good news for us Melbourneites, a little bit of the restrictions have eased, so that makes it all better, doesn't it, for us today. We obviously are working from home like most of you will be, so we hope that there's no delays in the internet or anything like that, so bear with us as we work through. I'm Helen O'Keefe, and I should have said that to start with, and Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Pitterino.
Sorry about that. We wanted to talk to you a little bit about who we are and also our company, HOK Talent Solutions. So for those of you that don't know us, we're an OHS specialist agency and we recruit nationally. We've been around now for around 6 years. And we partner exclusively with our clients. So that means that we're the only recruiter working on the job and we're selective. So we only work with clients that absolutely meet our values. We're unique in our approach. We don't tend to advertise roles. We work through our networks and do a lot of headhunting. And we really are known for our personalised and authentic approach. That's me. So I founded the business, HOK Talent Solutions, around 6 years ago. I've been recruiting in health and safety specifically for almost 10 years. And prior to that, was a talent acquisition manager at GlaxoSmithKline in the pharmaceutical industry, and then Australian Red Cross. So I've worked on both sides of the fence. I worked alongside safety peers in both of those roles. So that's really where my passion for health and safety grew to. And at HOK Talent Solutions, I recruit senior to executive opportunities. Whoops, Rachel.
Hi, so I'm Rachel Pitterino. I joined HOK Talent Solutions in 2019 after working within the retail sector for close to 7 years. My focus at HOK Talent Solutions is recruiting permanent, fixed term and contract positions, particularly at the coordinator, advisor, business partner and consultant level. And I place candidates across a vast number of industries. I've completed a postgraduate degree in psychology and am absolutely passionate about recruiting in the health, safety and wellbeing arena.
And her psychology background really adds to her being able to find the right fit as well for our clients. So welcome to our webinar session. We're going to crack the job interview code for you and provide you with 6 success strategies. And what we have done is structured it as much as we can like a normal interview. So we'll go through the interview structure, then we'll do breaking the ice, that small talk, crafting your elevator pitch, obviously being able to confidently tell your career story and answer some uncomfortable questions that might come through. We'll also run you through some of the behavioural questions you should expect at a HSE interview, and we will do some role playing as well. And Rachel's going to finish off talking to you about some of the questions to ask your future employer. Now is a really great time for you to look for a health and safety role. There is a lot out there, and I'll hand you over to Rachel, who's going to give you a bit of a market update to help us start the session.
Thanks, Helen. So as part of our role, we're keen to keep an eye on the market so we can provide our candidates and clients alike insightful information about the health and safety job market. So we utilise our own knowledge of the market as well as analyse job boards nationally. And I guess here is what we're finding. So interestingly, in the month of March, SEEK reported its highest number of job ads posted in a month in SEEK's 23+ year history. So, that's crazy, but interestingly, applications per ad were at the lowest since 2012. They also noted this trend in April as well. I think looking more closely and breaking down the OHS market. So what we're finding is the top 3 industries continuing to demand health and safety professionals sit within the manufacturing and FMCG, construction and healthcare, as well as followed closely by local government. In terms of states, so New South Wales, Vic and Queensland provide the most opportunities for health and safety professionals. And at the levels, so if you're an advisor, you're spoilt for choice in the market, followed by managers and coordinators / administrators. I guess in regards to heads of positions, naturally there are a small number of vacancies with these level of roles, but we have seen some impressive growth this year at this particular level.
Yeah, I think the great thing about COVID was it made health and safety a very popular area, and we have been run off our feet, which has been fabulous.
Yeah.
So let's get started.
So we believe our expertise in HSE recruitment activity, as well as our experience of supporting candidates and clients through the interview process, puts us in a great position to share our insights with you to help you set you up for success. So as Helen mentioned, she's recruiting at the executive end of the market. So I guess, what are you finding at your market, and what are you seeing candidates letting themselves down at the interview stage?
I think that end of the market is always such a competitive area, and when you're going for interviews, it's absolutely being on your game. So some of the things I've noticed is examples. It's about making sure that the examples are to point for the role. So if you are looking at a role that has quite a lot of strategy in there, making sure that your examples actually focus on the strategy work that you have done. So it's absolutely making it relevant. It's all about examples. So we will focus as we move through on that. What about you, Rach? What about at your level?
So probably in my level, it would be making sure that you're asking questions at the end of your interview. So what you'll sort of really see from us today is we recommend that two-way conversation. Interview shouldn't be just an interrogation, on you as the candidate. It should really be that, two-way conversation. So I think it's making sure you have some questions for your employer, future employer perhaps, at the end, and it also helps to show your interest as well, asking questions. So that would be my tip.
Okay. What about funny stories? We have to share one or two. What about some funny interviews?
Yeah. So I think one that springs to mind would be, we had a candidate, we were interviewing the candidate, and our question was to them, how would your manager describe you and what it's like to work with you? And that candidate's response was, I'm a big eater. Like, I bring in food all the time for everyone. And we're sort of talking about that and saying he was a foodie of the company. And we sort of went, oh, that's great, but probably not the answer we were looking for. So we've had a bit of a giggle with that candidate since. But yeah, he learned that was probably not the response to give a interview panel when he was at an interview. What about you, Helen?
You gave him some good coaching.
Yeah.
With me, so obviously there's been quite a few, I would think. There was one where I asked the candidate if they'd had a good morning, and it was a 11:30 interview, and they told me they'd just got out of bed. There was another one where the phone rang about 3 times and the person actually took the call, so I needed to actually ask them to turn it off. And there was another one where and this has always stuck with me, this is a long time ago, but I asked this person why they were interested in the role, and they were very thoughtful, and so I was waiting for a really good response. And then the gentleman responded that actually he wasn't that interested in the role. It was his wife that thought it would be a great opportunity for him. So there are a few things perhaps of not what to say.
Of course, yeah. All right, so without further ado, let's dive into our 6 success strategies for cracking the job interview code.
Thank you. here we go. Success strategy 1. So this is about the usual HSC interview. I think the first thing to be aware of is when preparing for a job interview is that there's no longer what we would say a usual job interview process. The interview is no longer confined to face-to-face and one-on-one process. So as you're aware, if you're interviewing too, more and more clients relying on innovative ways to manage interviews. A lot of video interviews now, or there's coffee shop interviews or there's panel interviews. So you will obviously have time to prepare for an interview, but perhaps it's preparing in different ways. If you haven't had an interview via video, for example, our top tips around that include, remembering to be online early to test that everything is working, and that you look right, that you're positioned right. Make sure that the panel has got your phone number or you have theirs in case there are any technical issues, and look at the camera, not at people's faces. So by looking directly at the camera on your laptop, you're looking straight at them. I think the other thing is, of course, having that appropriate background. So not letting there be mess behind you or people moving around. We do have a lot of information on our website, actually. So if you were to jump on our website before your interview, you will find that we have a video there about how to prepare for an online interview. I think as much as that format is going to be different, the crux of the interview is still going to be the same. You're still asked questions. Now, questions will be general or traditional questions and perhaps the behavioural questions in there as well. We do focus on behavioural questions in the success strategy program today, but we haven't focused on some of those traditional general questions. They're those questions that are about you and a little bit about your career. The questions that we think that you need to practice, the general traditional questions would be things like, why would you like to work for us? What value will you add to the role? Tell us about your strengths and development areas. What are your career aspirations, or where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? And then think about how people would describe you. You might get asked, like, what's it like to work with you? What would your direct reports say about you? What would your boss say about you? What would your peers say about you? So think through, because by practicing those questions, you're actually getting really comfortable and really confident about you and what it is you offer to the role. One question I really love asking, and start to think about this: if you were to leave your organisation today, what would your legacy be? What are you leaving behind that wasn't there when you started? So I think top tip here is that practice makes perfect. So the usual HSC job interview is no longer that usual in terms of the format, but actually the crux of the interview with questions is still going to be pretty much the same. So that's an overview of what it will look like. And now we're going to move on to that first part, which is really Rachel talking about breaking the ice.
Thank you. So sometimes, as I mentioned, interviews can feel like an interrogation. The spotlight's on you and everyone's waiting for you to give the right answers. But to help yourself feel more confident and to make a great first impression, you've got to make that interview a two-way conversation. So, it's a great way, to jump in to positively connect and engage with your interviewers. And I guess this opportunity really starts from when you are greeted. So using techniques like breaking the ice and small talk is a really great way to even stand out from the crowd and start the interview off on the right foot with a strong first impression. So for those of you who've had the opportunity, we did link an article to the webinar information. So it was on 4 things employers decide about you in the first 4 seconds of meeting you. And they are: do I like you? Do I trust you? Are you safe? And who do you remind me of? And they quoted in their article, even in a short 20-minute interview, a person can transmit up to 700 non-verbal signals. And that's above and beyond the verbal communication already taking place. So I guess in order to maintain a really strong first impression, it's keeping the small talk and breaking the ice topics really positive. So you don't want to go in there moaning about the weather or how hard it was to find a car space or something like that. You know, that's never going to really set you off on a good first step. So I guess in topics and strategies, I think of going in. So I think we say skip the cliches of the weather, but think about finding some common interests with your interviewers. So often, you know, you'll know who the interview panel will be, especially if you're going through an agency like us. We'll always give you the people that you are being interviewed by. So if you can do some polite digging through their LinkedIn profiles per se, you might find some common interests. And I think the way you bring it up, you know, it has to be authentic. It has to be, I guess, non-rehearsed as well, as best as you can. So for an example, you might be doing some digging on an interviewer and find that they're passionate about marathons as much as you are. So a simple way and a sneaky way, I guess, of bringing that up could be something like they ask you how your day is. You could say, I'm doing great, thanks. I started the day with training for a run for my upcoming half marathon, so I really can't complain. So there you've sneakily sort of put in that common interest, and that can often spark a further conversation. So I guess our take home here would be to practice and prepare, do your research, and make sure that small talk banter doesn't appear too rehearsed. You know, you want to be confident and authentic as possible as well. So now Helen is going to take us through the next strategy, which is crafting your elevator pitch. And this is a really important one.
Thanks, Rach. So I guess you've broken the ice. So in the normal interview, you've broken the ice. And now the next natural question could be, tell us about yourself. And this is one of the most difficult questions to answer because you're talking about yourself and you need to get that pitch right. You might struggle a little bit of how much to say or how little to say. So our best advice here is to be really time conscious. So this is not where you do that deep dive into your CV. This is just giving a little bit of a summary of who you are. So being time conscious, so really practicing this and perfecting it, that it should be no longer than 5 minutes. You know, be brief and succinct. So focus on some interesting points, give a high level overview and make it really relatable. So whatever you're saying, make sure that it fits with the role in front of you. So really relevant, and don't go back too far into your resume. So, you know, I have over 20 years of experience, but in an elevator pitch, I wouldn't go back that far. I would just sort of gloss over my earlier career if I did. We thought we'd actually role play it though. So let's pretend that I am applying to be the managing director for another OHS recruitment company. And I'll talk you through what I would say. Rach, do you want to ask me a question?
Yeah. I'll play the interviewer. So Helen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Rachel. Well, I began my recruitment career in Adelaide many years ago, and my portfolio included recruiting HR professionals. I realised that I had a real affinity for human resources, so I commenced studying for my bachelor degree. Using my recruitment skills as my foundation, I then went on to join GlaxoSmithKline and became their talent acquisition manager. From there, I had the opportunity to work for them in a HR advisor role. And interestingly, I didn't love it as much as I thought. I actually wanted to be back in recruitment because what I found was I didn't really enjoy the employee relations side of a human resources role. So from there, I went on to lead the talent acquisition team for Australian Red Cross, which included managing a team, and it gave me my first real responsibilities for running my own P&L. And then I actually did a little bit of a sidestep. I went and joined a recruitment company called The Next Step and recruited in human resources. That made sense again to my background, and I recruited executive HR people across Melbourne. From there, I was asked to join their sister brand, The Safe Step, which was their OHS recruiting division. I managed and grew that business nationally before leaving to set up HOK Talent Solutions around 6 years ago. Year on year, this business has grown, and we're now one of Australia's leading OHS recruitment companies.
Fantastic. So I think where you can see from that, so that only took Helen a couple of minutes. And I think the 3 key points we learned was around her relevant education. We got a snapshot of her career without her going too into detail about her roles, responsibilities, and achievements. And I think what came across was her passion for recruitment, which is obviously aligning with the role that she's currently interviewing for. So I think, that's a really good snapshot of Helen. And it also makes me as an interviewer want to ask more questions. So she's already got my attention in that first couple of minutes.
So yes, I think our top tip here is be really succinct and relevant to the role, and practice makes perfect. So again, practicing your elevator pitch and practicing, with your partner, with your friends, family, just to get that right. So we'll move on to the next slide now, which is the next natural part of an interview. So we've been through the breaking the ice. We've now told them a little bit about ourselves, and now we're moving through to that area where the CV starts to get reviewed.
Yeah, so success strategy number 4, confidently telling your career story and effectively answering those uncomfortable questions. So, it's not uncommon after your elevator pitch for your interviewer to choose a couple of roles on your CV to explore more in depth. So I guess what's really important here is you've got to remember that the interviewer has already reviewed your CV, and they get an understanding of your responsibilities and achievements in your role. So what's important here is that you're not reciting what's on your CV. They can read that. So I think what you really want to highlight and show is, talk to them about the role, but talk to them about the size of the organization, how many employees, if you had a portfolio you supported, what was that? What did that look like? And then talk about a few of your responsibilities. And I think here as well, you can really pick out your achievements and really showcase that. But I think you're always wanting to try to relate your experience to the role that you're going for. And it doesn't necessarily matter if it's a different industry. I think you can still pull on different risk profiles and your exposure and how it is complementary to the role that you're going for. In terms of, it's just practice as well. So if you just practice talking about that role, then you'll get a lot better at it as well. I think the next thing as well, so those uncomfortable questions that you get in an interview, I think what we mean by that is those types of questions that might cast you in poor light, or you're generally just really uncomfortable about talking about. So this could be gaps in your CV, or instances of being in a role for a short period of time, and I guess how you go about explaining that. So our tips here, and we thought we'd do a bit of a role play here as well about and how to have a positive response to those types of questions. So for example, something like, unfortunately the role and the culture as described to me wasn't the right fit for me to thrive and do my best work. I've learned that from that experience not to compromise on what's important to me. I think in that was positive, it was succinct, and it was short, but because I've mentioned that the role and the culture wasn't right, I think you can expect to then talk through what the right fit is for you, and of course, align that to the role and the company that you're in front of as well. Another response could be, I didn't feel the job was utilizing my abilities to the fullest or challenging me enough. Or I left the opportunity to advance my career. So that there's lots of ways. I think our take home here is that you should really be, I think, practicing your response, but be confident, be brief and diplomatic. What interviewers don't want to hear at this point is you bagging out a previous employer or a previous manager. I think, as we say, keep it really positive, keep it light, but to the point. And be conscious of your body language as well, because often when we're asked an uncomfortable question, we might tense up a little bit. So I think just relaxing and being honest in your answer as best as you can.
Absolutely. I think, again, what we're saying with every point here is practice makes perfect. And sometimes there will be uncomfortable questions, but it's about answering it positively. So thanks for going through that one, Rachel.
And I think also what we're finding just with COVID as well, that there is a bit of movement on people's CVs, and it's okay. It's not negative. It's not a negative thing.
Negative.
I think it's just how you go about talking through it to your potential future employer is really, really important. And I think, that's right. There are some sticklers out there. There are some sticklers for perfect resumes. And, none of us are in businesses now for that long. So gone are the days where we spent 10 years or 20 years in an organisation. That's changed. So it's just about, talking through the reasons why. And as Rachel said, being confident. Yeah. So then the next natural step after exploring your CV would be answering those behavioural questions. So Helen's going to take us through the next success strategy.
Thank you. So behavioural interview questions. These are the ones that usually start with, tell me about a time when, can you share a situation where, or what's an example that demonstrates? So examples, they're looking for examples that you can share. So they're really easy to answer if you remember it's about painting the picture and telling a story. So why they're asked is because they really do determine your potential success in the role based on your past behaviour and experience. So the more examples you can provide that are relatable and relevant to the job and industry, the bigger chance you have of securing the position. And look, we give feedback to candidates all the time around, answering behavioural interview questions. And sometimes when you're under the pump, it's difficult to come up with the right example. So again, it's being prepared and having them in your head to draw upon. And I think what we've done is put 5 questions up on the screen today, which all relate to HSE interviews. So you're likely to get asked a question around influence. We all know that HSE professionals have to influence. So influencing a senior leader to implement a new initiative. Positive change, so being a positive change agent, where have you needed to do that? Where have you had to manage a particularly difficult stakeholder? How did you improve the safety culture? And then managing competing priorities. So start to practice these questions. The STAR technique is a really great way to answer behavioural questions because it helps you put the framework together. So you just have to Google STAR, the STAR technique, and so much comes up. But basically STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. And it might even help when you're practicing to write down STAR and put your examples together that way. That could be something. But what we wanted to do is a role play for you about how to answer one of these questions. So Rachel's going to ask me a question.
We thought we'd utilise that first question as well. So Helen's going to give an example of how she would answer and we can workshop it. So tell me about a time when you had to influence a senior leadership to implement a new HSE initiative.
Thanks, Rachel. The situation was that when I joined the really excellent beer company, I introduced an on-site physio program to help reduce injuries. It was a really positive program because we hadn't had anything quite like it, and it had a significant effect on reducing injuries to the point that it saved us around $200,000 per annum. What did you think of that one, Rachel?
So I think it was too brief. I think if we go back to the STAR technique that Helen touched on, I think in her example, she gave a pretty brief but good overview of the situation and the result, but we missed that whole middle section of what she actually did. So that's really where you're going to be able to showcase your skill set. So let's go again and see if she can improve on her example. So same question again. Tell me about a time when you had to influence senior leadership to implement a new HSC initiative.
Okay, so what I'm going to do actually is just paint out the STAR. So this would be the right answer. So situation. When I joined a really excellent beer company, I noticed that our largest site had an unusual amount of manual handling injuries. It was our packaging site, and there was still a manual element in doing the work. People were on average taking 3 days to recover from soreness, and the site was starting to rely more on labour hire workforce. And then the task and the action. So, what did I do about it? I knew that I needed to analyse the incidents to paint a picture. So I did this while spending time on the floor, watching how workers work, talking to supervisors, and of course, talking to the injured workers. I began to really form an opinion that injuries were perhaps preventable if we introduced stretching and had some on-site physio support, because the average age of our workforce was 58. There was a program I knew worked really well, as I'd been part of the implementation team of this program at Holden, where we reduced similar injuries by 86% over a 12-month period. However, in the back of my mind, I knew that if I raised this with my operations manager, he was likely to dismiss it because there just was no budget. So I went away and did some cost analysis, which included tapping into additional funding from our insurer. And then I finished with the result. So through demonstrating to the operations manager that although we'd have an initial outlay in the first 12 months, we were likely to save more than $85,000, I got him interested. We then successfully introduced a pilot program, and it was terrific. In 2 years, we saved about $200,000, and it's really changed our culture. Exercising before shift has become fun. People don't want to miss out on it. And I also get a real kick out of seeing even our MG out there on the shop floor stretching. So that was the example. So the whole example using STAR. So please don't criticise what I said about health and safety, because the actual content might not have been quite right. But it gave you the STAR technique. So the situation, task, action, and result. And again, practice makes perfect. And they're probably, as I said, the questions that you get asked there are going to be a great way for you to demonstrate how you will do the job using your prior examples.
And you can see the difference in her examples. Like the second one really painted that whole picture, and you could really pinpoint what she did and where her strengths were in that. Where that first example, we didn't get that at all. So I think it's a good idea to write your examples down using that situation, task, action, and result.
Great, thank you. So now that part is over and we're moving along. We actually have really finished the interview, because you've broken the ice, you've told the interviewers about yourself, you've also talked through your CV, answered any uncomfortable questions. Now you've done the behavioural questions, you've got through all of those, and you can start to breathe a bit because you're getting to the end. So now Rachel is going to take us through the next one. Whoops, sorry, 6.
So questions, as we said in the beginning, you've got to remember the focus of the interview is always a two-way conversation. It's really important that you don't leave an interview without asking a question. So often, you'll naturally go into a lot of interviews with a lot of role-specific questions, and a lot of them will be answered throughout the interview. And then you might get to the end and go, well, I don't really have any other questions. But you do. So we've got some questions that we've put up on the screen that will be helpful, and you probably won't get answered through the interview as well. So as you can see, you know, some of the questions we've highlighted: what will success look like in the role? If you could change one thing about the organization safety culture, what would that be? What would you say is the most important unique aspect of your workplace culture? There was an article in the Financial Review about your CEO last week. Can you tell me more about that? I can see on LinkedIn that you've been here for X, Y, Z years. What's been the highlight for you? Another great question that I love that I heard from a candidate as well was saying, you know, what would you like to see in me, which the previous person didn't bring to the role? So that's a really great question. I think what's important and why we suggest that you have these questions is it because it shows your genuine interest in the business and the role. We've actually had a candidate who went forward for an interview, and she didn't ask any questions to the client. And that actually left a really bad taste in the client's mouth, and the client wasn't sure why, you know, they didn't ask any questions and question her interest in the role. Even though she was very committed and was really keen to join this organization, it just put her in a sort of a bad light. So, you know, we suggest picking one or two of these questions on the screen. And I think it's also, you know, writing them down, especially if you're in a Zoom interview, you have that capability of putting them to the side, because, you know, as you get to the end of the interview, you're sort of a little bit brain dead. It's been 45 minutes, you know, you can't rely on your memory. So I think it's just writing a couple down, asking those questions. And as well, if you're not going through an agency, I think it's asking, you know, what the next steps will be from here, and thanking the interviewers for their time, and giving you the opportunity to discuss your suitability for the role as well. So I think they're sort of key to ending the interview on a good light.
Another follow-up question, I think, too, is about, have I given you everything that I needed to out of today's interview? Was there any follow-up questions that you had for me? That could be a nice way to end it as well once you've got to the end of your questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's it from us for the moment. We're really keen to see if you have any questions for us. And we can see, I think, a few in the box there. So
yes. We have a few. So one of the first questions we have got from John. So thank you for your question. His question was, is there any stigma around multiple short terms at organisations, i.e. 3 to 5 years?
To me, that's not that short a term anymore. So I think that probably answers your question. No, I think that 3 to 5 years, that gives you absolutely enough time to provide examples and talk through your achievements and measure your results.
Yeah. And then another question was, how do you provide responses to questions about the role you're applying for if you've never ever done the role before? You may have picked up a lot of experience as a generalist, but if you apply for a specialist role, it is difficult to provide specialist examples.
It is difficult to provide specialists. Yes, it is difficult to provide examples if you haven't moved into that field. So that's probably where you might have to say, this is what I would do if I was to transition into the role, and perhaps give an example from the previous workplace that kind of ties in with it, using the same behaviours maybe. Would you add that to add to that, Rach?
Yeah, definitely. I think and risk profiles as well. So depends on the specialist role, but you know, if you're a HSE advisor who is now going for a systems role, you know, you would have been a part of writing some procedures, you know, possibly in your generalist roles, but haven't necessarily been in a systems focused role. So I think you can still pick some of your past experience and apply it to the role that you're going for as well.
I think the great thing is you've got an interview for that role. So they've chosen you because of something in your CV. So that's great.
Yeah. I'm just looking through the questions. Okay. We've got a question here, and we can tell you our approach, but one of the questions was, why do recruiters not get back to you after you've been interviewed by the employer?
I don't know why they don't, because we would hand on heart say that we do. So that's not our practice. But I think following up the recruiter would be a wonderful idea, to give the recruiter a call or an email, and to continue driving that.
Yeah. And I think what we've seen across COVID from candidates telling us this as well is that a lot of, it might be like an internal recruitment agency that's dealing, so it's directly with the organization you're applying for. So I think, yeah, it's all about emailing or giving them a phone call just to follow up, because that also shows your interest in the role. But yeah, our approach is always to give you a call afterwards and provide you feedback, and also get your feedback after you've been to an interview. But yeah, I think it's just emailing them or giving them a call so you get that.
And probably just to finish off on that, if that's getting you down, because it can happen, and perhaps multiple times, just remember they're obviously not the organisation that you want to join.
Another question was, what is the best way to navigate a question around redundancy?
I don't think redundancies is actually really legitimate. So a redundancy is not about a person, it's about a role. So you should be able to talk about why the role was no longer required. So it's never about the person, it's about the role.
Yeah. We had another question. Is the best time to ask about possibility of working 4 days a week rather than full time prior to attending an interview, as this could be a deal breaker for an organisation and candidate? Yeah, we completely agree that you'd probably have that initial phone call. So I think it would be stating it there that if that is your preference, I think it's better to be upfront in the beginning than go through an interview process and get to the end and realize that they don't have the flex for 4 days. So yeah, we'd suggest that.
Because then you've wasted your time as well as their time. So being upfront is the best way to manage that.
Yeah. I had another question. When you have a face-to-face interview, is it acceptable to have some notes handy to refer back to, or does it take away from the conversation? It's a good question. We would probably say no. We've had someone come in before, it was feedback from a client. Someone had an iPad in the interview with notes, and I think that absolutely distracted from the interview. So I think if you're coming in with a lot of sheets of paper, then possibly not, that would be distracting. I think you could probably have them handy before you go into the interview and just remember your final points, but then probably best to put them away.
I think I agree with that, absolutely. Not disagreeing at all. I think just around the questions that you have that you want to ask, that's okay to be written down. So before you go into the interview, and Rachel talked through this in the presentation, jot down some of the questions that you want to ask. It's okay to bring those out at the end. But yeah, you just could get too distracted with questions as you go through.
Yeah. I had another question around referees. So when providing referees once requested, how do you navigate giving a good most recent referee if you don't want your current organisation knowing you're going for another role?
Yeah, we actually covered this. We have on our LinkedIn company page every Tuesday tips. So if you're not following our LinkedIn company page, do that. We covered that a couple of weeks ago because it would come up with some of our candidates. Our best advice is to say to the company that you aren't comfortable providing a referee from a current workplace unless you are the preferred candidate. And we do that all the time as recruiters. We will say to our clients, look, Joe's comfortable with providing a reference from his current organisation, but obviously doesn't want to upset anybody if he doesn't get the role. So if he is the preferred candidate and if we can have that contract waiting in the wings, he's very happy to provide that. So that could be a way of navigating it. It is getting a little bit more common now to ask for a current referee. I have noticed that that's happening. The other thing we say to clients in a hot market is don't do that, because if they know the person's looking, they might counter offer them and then you miss out. So yeah, it's different ways.
Yeah. We have another question around salary expectations. So how do you best respond to salary expectations conversations in interviews?
Yes, that's a tricky one, isn't it, Rachel? We were talking about this before. Obviously, if you're going through a recruitment agency, we manage that for you and we know what the range is and all of those things. But if you are going alone and you've applied for a role through Seek, sometimes that's difficult. We were talking about this earlier today, actually, and we're providing some advice to a candidate about perhaps the best way is to say, because they might ask you and say, you know, what are you looking for? What are you currently on? And you just don't want to underprice yourself or overprice yourself. So perhaps the best way is to say, well, are you able to tell me what the range is, please? And then see what that range is and then position yourself in there, and hopefully it is within your range. If it's completely out of your range, and then you've got to say that. But what do you think, Rach, about trying to ascertain what it is before as well? That might be.
Yeah. We suggest, normally you're going to have that initial conversation before they book you in for an interview. So I think you should probably there, I think that's a absolutely acceptable place to ask, can I ask what the salary range is? Because we've heard of a candidate who went through an interview process, got to the offer stage, and then found out that the salary was 20,000 less than what the candidate was expecting. So, if that had maybe been managed a little bit better, because it was just, I think, through Seek, if that had been managed, then you're not wasting your time or a future employer's time. So if you can bring that up, I think that's a fair question to ask, and most people will be happy to give you that range anyway. Yeah. We had another question. How would you approach an internal interview when you know the people interviewing you?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Because sometimes we fall into that feeling very relaxed and it's still an interview. So you do have to try and remember that they actually don't know everything about you. So they don't. So make sure that you have examples, just like a normal interview, and you probably need to put a bit more practice into it as well, I would say, and don't fall into that too relaxed mode. Would that be your advice too, Rachel?
Absolutely, yeah. Just because you know the people, I think you still treat it as a formal interview, and I think almost pretend they have no idea what you've been doing and have that opportunity to be able to showcase your skill set. So treat it like you don't know them is probably the best, because then you're not going to fall into that relaxed, too comfortable state. I'm just looking through the questions. Thank you everyone for your questions as well. Another question. So I left my last role because I was being worked into the ground. How do I manage this when applying for my next role?
I think you should be able to find out when you're at an interview about the expectations of the role. And it's not like asking, what are the hours here? Because in any safety role, we know that, it is usually you are on call, or you do have to do a little bit of extra work when there's incidents to investigate, etc., etc. So probably the best advice is the questions, the follow-up questions that you can ask at the end. As you know, you've been through the interview, what are you picking up? What are you sensing about the culture? Is there anybody also that you can ask? Is there anybody on LinkedIn that you know that's worked there? How is the safety team resourced? What are the current projects? What do they expect of you in your first 90 days? So, you know, just thinking of some really good follow-up questions that you can ask and finding out who you know that works there.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. You know, you can probably be sold a picture of what the role's going to be what it's going to look like, but I think it's those questions that you ask. And don't be afraid. You know, if you've gone through an interview process with them and you're at offer stage but you still have a question mark, you know, is this right? Go back and ask those questions so you make that informed decision. And yeah, as Helen said, see if you know anybody or that's worked in that role or organization before, and you'll get a good sense there. Another question. So what advice would you give someone going into interviews and wanting to enter the OHS field as a graduate with minimal experience in the field? How would they avoid sounding inexperienced for the role? So I've actually just written an article on our website about landing your first role if you're a graduate wanting to move into health and safety. I think it's all about, and I'm sure Helen, you can add in as well, it's all about transferable skills. So, you know, it's showing your eagerness to learn, tenacious, you're passionate about health and safety. There's still skill sets that you could have learned if you were working in retail or hospitality beforehand, that you can transfer into that first role. And then, yeah, I think, Helen.
I think that, you know, your article says it also. Jump on the website and look at the article that Rachel wrote, because it also talks about the qualifications and experience and perhaps how to get that first role as well. So if you've got really great admin skills, why don't you have a look at joining one of the insurance companies and, you know, working in workers' compensation and then moving into health and safety naturally that way. So there's lots of pathways there for you, and we'd be happy to talk to you after this as well if you wanted to reach out.
Yeah, I think it's key to remember that you do have a skill set that you bring to each role, even if you haven't worked in that industry, and it's just showing that you are really keen. And if you've done your diploma, you know, that's a point to touch on, that you are educated. You just need that hands-on experience now.
Yeah.
What other questions? Okay, we have another question. How do you explain to your recruiter / the employer a gap in your career when you are a 2020 graduate and could not find a role due to the instability of the job market? I think that's fine. I think it's just being honest, and people are going to understand that as well. So again, just being open and honest. And I think if you can confidently say, you know, I was applying, but due to COVID, there weren't as many opportunities, then I think that's fine. It wouldn't be a negative in our eyes, as long as you could talk through, why there was a bit of a gap. And also, everyone knows if you're a graduate, it does take you a little while to secure that first role. So, I think people have got that understanding. Perfect. I think that's all the questions. Apologies if I missed anyone. If you have any other questions, then feel free to send us a message. We're going to put on the next screen our emails and our phone numbers. We're also on LinkedIn. So if you want to direct any questions there, we would be more than happy to answer them. That's
right. So I guess thank you for listening to us, and we are here genuinely to help you. So feel free to reach out to us. We also have amazing information on our website. There's also a podcast series that I do, and that's talking to senior leaders about health and safety. The last one I did, which is on the website now, is with Earl Eddings, the chair of Cricket Australia, who talks about health and safety in cricket. So you might like listening to that as well. So we'd really like to thank you. It's been great doing this. We hope you enjoyed it. We know that you'll receive a survey as well as this presentation. And we hope to get to meet you, because we can't see you. We hope to get to meet you if we haven't met you already.
Yeah, and our podcast can be found on iTunes as well, so you can access from either our website or iTunes. I just saw a final question pop through about that.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. Yep. But thank you so much, and obviously thank you to the Australian Institute of Health and Safety for letting us host this webinar, and we all hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.